Today I'm sharing a timely replay from the Unhurried Living Podcast. I interviewed KJ Ramsey on her book, This Too Shall Last, Finding Grace When Suffering Lingers. Now, the entire episode will play, including an introduction of KJ, so for now, I'll leave you with this. You are not alone in your suffering, and KJ is an expert on this, having suffered physically for years. So listen and take heart. I'm Jem Fadling, and it's time for I Can Do That. Many of us treat suffering like a problem to fix. Simply put, we'd rather not suffer at all. But if we do, we'd prefer it to be short. But what if our pain or suffering linger? What if it doesn't go away quickly or at all? We may wonder if God sees us or if somehow we've failed God. We may question God's very nature. If God loves us, why does He allow us to hurt? Today, I'm talking with KJ Ramsey, who has suffered with pain every day for the last 11 years. And she has much to say about the presence and love of God in the midst of that pain. Welcome to the Unhurried Living Podcast. Over a decade ago, chronic illness plunged therapist and writer KJ Ramsey straight into the paradox of living with pain. Before her illness, faith made sense. But when pain came and never left, KJ had to find a way across the widening canyon that seemed to separate God's goodness from her excruciating circumstances. She wanted to conquer suffering. Instead, she encountered a God who chose it. She wanted to make pain past tense. Instead, God invited her into a bigger story. KJ Ramsey is a licensed professional counselor, writer, and recovering idealist who believes sorrow and joy coexist. Her writing has been published in Christianity Today, Relevant, Huffington Post, and more on the integration of theology, psychology, and spiritual formation. She lives in Denver, Colorado, with her husband. And you can follow KJ's writings at kjramsey.com and across all social media at KJ Ramsey Writes. Here's my conversation with KJ. Well, KJ, it is so good to have you on our podcast today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's great to see your face and to talk to you.
I know, I feel the same. You are actually another person that I met on Instagram. I guess I keep giving shout outs to Instagram because I've met some amazing people there.
Likewise.
And I feel like I kind of know you only because you're so self-revealing, and I've been tracking with your story, and it's actually what made me want to talk to you about this book. Because the topic, of course, is living with pain. And the book is This Too Shall Last, which is a great title.
Thank you.
But, I think somewhere in the book you talked about the idea about this not being a before and after story. You said, I'm writing from the middle. Most of us prefer the nicely wrapped, and then they live happily ever after. But I personally love that you're writing about living with pain, because I think most people do, in some form or another, whether it's relational or emotional or physical or psychological. So I was hoping here at the very beginning you would give us some background about your own pain, your own life, and what you've been living with for years.
Definitely can do that. So I have been living with ankylosing spondylitis, AS, much easier to say, which is an autoimmune disease, for 11 years now. And it causes daily pain, especially my spine, but also in my other joints. And it's been like a house guest that came and never left and is now part of the family. And and you have to learn how to love and welcome and talk to and be with, and it's there. So that's the major suffering that's been in my life. But I in the process of learning how to welcome this disease in my life, which is, I know, weird language, but when it's not going away, you have to learn how to live with it. I've also learned how to embrace the suffering that's always been part of my story that I hadn't named as suffering, the sadness and the sorrow, the trauma, the abuse that was part of my childhood that I really had minimized, because that was what I was taught to do. So there's that, and some spiritual abuse that we've experienced as adults is really the three kind of areas that come together when I talk about pain. I'm really talking about all kinds of pain that affects us to the core, and that all of it really affects our bodies, our relationships, and our faith.
Yeah. Again, because we all can relate to this, if we're even semi-awake to our own journey, we are carrying something. So can you unpack that even just a little bit more? What is it like to have that sort of trifecta of issues or dynamics, if you want to call them, to culminate into, the book you wrote? But in the book, I mean, you're sharing your life, you're sharing your thoughts about how we can make our way. I'd love to hear you unpack that just a bit more.
Yeah. So, I love what you're saying, that we all are carrying pain with us through life. And I think it's really true. And yet, our posture towards pain is to push it away, usually, to treat it like a problem that needs to be fixed. And in a sense, it is. We weren't made for pain. But pain also is part of the human story. And in my process of experiencing my pain and having pain that like no amount of medicine or prayer can push away, I've actually encountered again and again Christ as the pain bearer. And so it's in this place of having to encounter my pain instead of being able to push it away, that I get to see God in a way that I can't when I'm full of effort to get rid of the problem in my life. And I think that's really the heart of my book, is that I want people to be able to encounter Jesus as the one who stands with us in suffering because he chose to bear it himself, and to see that all of the pain that we carry through life could actually be a place of encountering the pain bearer himself. And because of that, that all the pain in our life, all the sorrow could actually become a place of joy because Jesus is with us. And that's the most amazing thing in the whole world to get to experience, right?
Oh my gosh. What you're saying is so profound. And I mean, it's easy on one level for us to sit here and talk about this and say what you just said out loud, right? But I believe this into my cells. And I shared a story actually of severe pain that I suffered in the book, in my recent book, which we're not talking about today, but I shared the story in there. It didn't last 10 years like yours, but it lasted long enough for me to experience something I'd never experienced in my life, which was nerve pain. I didn't know nerve pain existed. And what the reason I believe down to my cells what you just said is because I experienced it. I mean, the presence of God and Jesus with us. I mean, it's the Easter promise and the Christmas promise all wrapped up in one. God with us. I experienced it in my pain, which it's just indescribable. Isn't it indescribable? So I believe in what you're saying so deeply that it is possible to encounter. And someone who's in pain right now listening may or may not be able to understand because you use the word joy.
I know.
Which seems so. Now, I have to be honest. It was only after when I looked back that I could attach the narrative of joy to that story. Because when I was in it, I was just trying to get through every day.
Yeah.
But yeah, talk more about that. How does joy emerge from that level of pain?
Yeah. I love how you just said that too, that you attached a narrative of joy to it after the fact. I think that's really beautiful and profound that we can look back and like re-narrate how we've been experiencing our stories.
Yes.
is incredibly powerful. And then I think as you do that, as you re-narrate and keep living and the pain doesn't go away, that story becomes what's true of how you experience the story in the present.
Yes.
So it's that posture towards the past and being able to look back and see Jesus was there. It then changes your posture towards the present, that you could look at your present moment full of pain, whatever kind that is for a listener, and have this expectancy in your soul that you're going to encounter Jesus here.
Yes. That's discernment at its best, isn't it? Isn't that what classic discernment is? Looking back and learning. So what you're saying, so the present and the future become different.
Right. Yeah. And that's something that I love about, I guess, what God has written into my story is that when I am willing to be present to my life in the present as it is, including pain, I actually get to experience the story of God becoming true here. It's like Christ's story of entering this world and being willing to be embodied and walking through life, having to trust his Father, and walking through life experiencing misunderstanding and pain and even abandonment on the cross, and being faithful to walk all the way to death and be raised to new life by the Spirit. That story authentically becomes mine when I am willing to be present where I am as who I am, not trying to cloy after a different life than I have or be stronger than I am, but just be me here now. Because I've been united to Christ by faith, his whole story is accessible to me and can be true here. And what that means is when we don't have hope, he has hope on our behalf. When we don't have strength, he is strong. When I don't have faith for what my life could be, Jesus has faith for me. And I can acknowledge that that's true. And that changes then how I experience my own faithlessness and my own fragility. It's just every time that I'm willing to be present, a whole story of the past and the future of God making this world new becomes mine here and changes this moment and changes me into a person who's part of this great story.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, I knew there was a reason I wanted to have a conversation with you. Because to me, this is taking, I mean, it's funny to say it this way, but, the old school words like gospel and good news. I mean, to me, the rubber meets the road with all the things that we might become very familiar with when we're talking about this level of pain and this level of connection with Jesus that you can have. Makes everything real, more meaningful, and I think more close to what it actually means. What is the good news? The good news is Jesus walked through. We just came through Easter week, and we had Good Friday, the crucifixion, and Holy Saturday, the waiting without knowing, and Easter Sunday, the resurrection. And it's not just a holiday. It is the grand narrative. And what you just described is that we are partakers in that grand narrative.
Partakers and participants.
Yes. Yes. So, well, we've talked about joy, talked about pain. You don't get too far into your book before the word grace shows up.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear you talk about the word grace in this context. What does that mean for you?
Right. So I think about the word grace a lot since I chose to put it in my book title. And something I was thinking about this last night, actually. Something I didn't put in the book was what I was taught grace was growing up, which was the old school definition of grace is unmerited favor.
Right.
And I loved, I was the kid that loved going through catechism and learning the Westminster Confession. I grew up Presbyterian. But there was something detached about that definition of grace that also said something negative about who we are that I don't know is actually consistent with the whole story of Scripture. The focus on unmerited is partly true, but it's not wholly true. So anyway, I say that to say our ideas of grace are constrained by the culture that we come from. And I think grace is much more abundant and much more present and palpable and offered to us constantly than we are probably culturally constrained to notice.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Yes. I mean, for a long time, well into my life, I couldn't say I deserve anything. I mean, you could have put, I deserve ... fill in the blank. And
I would have filled in that blank with death. I deserve death, right? Good Presbyterian.
Of course. Yes. And I'm not even here to blame. We could go down that road to blame anything or anyone. No, I hear you, but I had to work that through for myself too. Is it really true that I don't deserve anything? That just sounds so sad and so not abundant life.
Right. Well, it's like the focus becomes on the part of the narrative of Scripture where before our union with Christ. And I just don't think that we've told the story of our union with Christ enough or as often as we need to.
Yeah.
So we talk about all that we're saved from, but we don't talk about all that we've been saved to.
Yeah. Oh.
And grace is all that we've been saved to. Yes. And because by faith we're united to Jesus, we are always then united to and offered grace, goodness, life, the presence of the Spirit, the story that ends in joy is always intersecting ours.
Yeah.
And that's grace. So faith has united us to this life and this power and this story that perhaps we do not deserve, but is ours.
Right. Right. Yeah. So whether or not you use the word deserve, there's a big, huge gift here.
Right.
And so I guess the question becomes for us, will we open it, or will we dive in? Yeah.
Right.
It's one of my mentors said, one of his main messages was actually on grace. And he said something very similar to what you're saying about how we often think grace is the doorway. It was what got us into the door. But he did a big study of scripture. I think it was in the New Testament. He was looking up the word grace, and an overwhelming percentage of the usage of the word grace was actually on living this life that we're called into. There were some that grace was there, whatever get in the door means, but this life we're living and overwhelming. And it's a way to make our way.
Exactly. Yes. It's a way to make our way. And something I'm sorry if you hear noisiness. I think they're like working on something outside of our apartment
I can't hear it.
So.
I can't. That's okay.
Good. Well, anyway, something you were saying made me think it seems important to acknowledge that we're talking about this conversation's in the context of suffering.
Right.
So it's pretty surprising and a little disconcerting to say, okay, so there's something good here. Like, is there grace here? And I think part of why it's so hard to see that there could be grace in a life that's full of struggle is because of this conditioning to think like grace is what walks you through the door. And then we have all these expectations of what it would then mean that we've been rescued, like saved. We just, I think, have a lack of imagination of what that can mean here. So I don't know. I hope the book and this conversation like help us have some imagination.
Yeah, right. Yeah. What else does the term abundant life mean? Right. I have come that they might have life and life abundant. That's an old translation, I think.
Yeah.
Whatever.
In the beginning, I think I start the first chapter with this quote from my favorite author, Kathleen Norris. And she says,
Oh, yeah.
For grace to be grace, it must give us things we didn't know we needed and take us to places where we didn't want to go. As we stumble through the crazily altered landscape of our lives, we find that God is enjoying our attention as never before. Like grace takes us to places we didn't want to go. And it's about, I like that she says, God is enjoying our attention.
Yes.
As never before. That's what grace is about. It's taking us somewhere that we maybe didn't want to go. And it's asking us to pay attention to the presence of God that is with us. And that means paying attention to our present lives.
Exactly. Actually, I have a quote written down here that you said that I think goes exactly with what you're talking about. So let me read this.
Okay.
And maybe say a little bit more about that. You said, I've come to see that living with suffering that lingers can mean more fully receiving God's presence that lasts. God's presence that lasts. So yeah, maybe talk more about that.
So the reason that I say that is because I have experienced that suffering, sorrow, and pain invite me to pay attention to God and to my life in a way that I am not usually willing to when I am able to go through life hurried and hustling.
Yeah.
Suffering slows us down.
It really does.
It invites us to pay attention.
Yeah. That's, of course, that's like 100% on brand for Unhurried Living. And
Yeah.
actually, you're leading me straight into the thing that I wanted to talk about next. I alluded earlier to my own pain. This was about 12 years ago. And at one point when it was still early on and I was like, I could now like move around. I was functional, but it was still terrible. I remember specifically, that's emblazoned in my brain. I was walking in the parking lot from the chiropractor's office to CVS, which was just around the corner of this little strip mall. And I was walking like, you're too young for this. Anyone who's as old as I am, the old Carol Burnett show, there was a Tim Conway character who was an old man and he walked really slow. Have you ever seen any of those? You're way too young for this.
No, but I walked like that many days of my life. So I totally know what you're talking about.
I mean, I was walking just painfully slow. And I realized that there is a pace of pain. So you did, in fact, talk a little bit about suffering and slowing. So I'd love for you to talk about that pace of pain.
Well, I love how you put that, pace of pain. I'm a little bit obsessed with alliteration, so thank you for that.
Sure.
There is a pace of pain, and it's much slower than we want, and which is why it's such a paradox to invite people to pay attention to it and to welcome it. Pain makes us aware of our limitations and our humanness. So pain, like you were just describing, that makes you walk that slow, it is unavoidable, and you can't get around that. You like your body physically cannot go faster than that, and that's humbling. And when that persists, and like that becomes how you walk a lot of the time. And you can think about this, figuratively too, for people listening, then there comes a point at which like you start to get used to that pace, and maybe you notice things that you can't notice when you're walking fast. Maybe you see the flowers that are planted in front of that building. Or also maybe you form a gratitude for the fact that you can take steps. Like right now, my treatment's been failing for my disease, and walking is pretty difficult right now. And the other night we went to our park at dusk, and it was the first time I could go on a sizable, well, it wasn't even sizable. I couldn't even make it. There's a lake and I couldn't make it around the lake, but it was like the longest walk I've been on in a couple weeks. And I felt so much gratitude to be able to do it and to be able to see what was around me and be there. The pace of pain can produce pleasure in our sheer capacity to exist, because we become aware of the wonder that it is that we can do anything. When you have seasons and even a structure in your life of stuff that you cannot do, then you become really grateful for what you can do. And that gratitude is joy. So that's, we get back to that joy word. Like, I'm so grateful that I can sit here with you. I'm so grateful that right before this, I was able to see a client. And there's a lot of times in my life where I can't work. And it makes me so grateful for when I can show up and be here. And I don't always get to have that.
Right.
So I receive it as a gift when I can have it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm hearing in what you're saying, there's a kind of focusing and then a simplicity. And I think both of those, for some people, would be quite welcome because we don't live in a focused and simple world. Right. And especially now, I mean, we're recording this in April. Actually, I think you're going to be on Monday. So this will still be on topic. Sometimes we record 2 months in advance, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, we're right in the middle of the coronavirus still.
Mm-hmm.
And there has been a worldwide forced slowness in many ways in our homes, sheltered in place. And once we let ourselves ease into what is actually occurring, I think we have the opportunity for what you're talking about: focus, simplicity, gratitude.
Mm-hmm.
For the things that we would call the small things or the mundane things, but those are actually life, aren't they? Because isn't most of our life small and mundane? I mean, right?
Yes, it is.
So you're actually talking about noticing our actual life.
Yes, exactly. I mean, that's really what the book is about. It says it's about suffering, but really it's for all of us to just, it's an invitation to pay attention to your present life as a place where God is present.
Yeah.
That is what it is. Yeah. And when you were talking just now, I thought part of that means being willing to grieve.
Yeah.
It is there is grief to being slowed down. There is grief to not being able to walk easily. There's grief, and we don't get to the gratitude without the grief. And when we were talking earlier about like, how is it that joy happens with Jesus? Well, the joy happens as we are willing to show God our sorrow. We experience being heard and seen.
Yes.
And that becomes joy, because in a spot where our culture tells us to hide our limitations and to keep our sorrow to ourselves until it's past, Jesus invites us to be seen and heard by him. And the weakest parts of ourselves that we have learned to like shove into a corner of our souls becomes welcomed and held. And in his willingness to see us, we become more willing to welcome our whole selves. And so there's this grieving process of honestly doing things like praying the Psalms, lamenting our pain,
right?
Like, again and again. That's what produces gratitude. That's what produces joy. I just felt it was like important to share that part, because I think it could, I don't know, maybe a listener could hear us talk and be like, okay, so you're just really thankful for your suffering. Well, good for you.
Right. La, 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 la.
I was like, no, well, like, we're grateful because God meets us here.
Right. Yeah. Oh, I realize that I'm probably not alone in this. I spend a lot of time wanting to protect myself from something what I consider to be negative. And the further along I go, the more I realize that those are the places we're going to come back around to the same thing we said before. That's the place where you meet God. And I like the word reality because reality is just, it really is our friend. What is actually happening? Can I acknowledge it and sink into it and then be with God in it? Now, that's a synopsis of a process that has more steps and stuff, but that's the fruit of that. I guess what I'm trying to say, the fruit of that is the joy that you're talking about. The fruit of that is the gratitude. It's not like you have to eke out joy in the middle of your pain.
Mm-mm.
You're going to pretty much just live in the pain. If it's really super severe, it's like you have blinders on. I mean, it's certain levels. It's all you can do right then is this.
Yeah.
But there is fruit that's produced.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Do you think that's the way to talk about how the joy emerges?
Yeah. Well, I think the joy, before I had a title for the book, at one point I thought about something like the surprising story of joy and suffering. It's like going to be the subtitle. And because it's like joy comes as a surprise. It kind of comes to us, visits us, like a butterfly, like landing on you for a moment. It comes, and we put ourselves in the place where we can receive it. It doesn't always come, but it comes and it surprises us. And I know from 11 years of living like this with present daily pain that for those who are listening, joy will come and surprise you and meet you and fill you and strengthen you. And it comes as you are practicing being present to your life. And when we embrace God's presence in our life and we make space for it, we practice spiritual disciplines of silence and solitude, and we learn how to lament. That actually builds up the structures in our brain that can experience God as present. So, our emotional memory is being changed as we come to God again and again, and we put ourselves in a posture to welcome him here. We move from, like, right now, we experience suffering and we equate it with God's absence or his judgment. Mm-hmm. And that's more because of our stories of our earliest years than it necessarily is of the reality of who God is. And as we come toward God with the faith that perhaps he could be the good, kind God that scripture says he is, we come there again and again, our brains, bodies, souls begin to learn to receive him as he is, not as who we fear that he might be. Mm-hmm. And that actually changes your brain to move from structures that expect abandonment from God and from important people in your life to pathways of peace that expect that God is here. Like, this process that you're talking about really does change your brain and changes your body so that hope and welcome and even joy become more accessible to you. You experience who God is, you experience that he's here, you experience that he hears you. And it happens because, like, courage and faith are virtues, not just possessions. It's not just something you have or don't have. It's something that you practice, and it becomes more true as you practice it.
Yeah.
No?
Yeah. Oh, I'm not even going to add anything to that. That was just so, thank you. Thank you. I think actually the way I'd like to end this is one last question, which is, if someone's listening to us right now and they are actually in some form of pain, and we listed a bunch: emotional, psychological, physical, relational, and it's severe, what would you want to leave them with right now?
I guess I would want to say to them, your pain matters.
Mm.
I think of words from Nicholas Walterstorff in Lament for a Son. And he said, every evil act extracts a tear from God. I think all of our pain also prompts God to cry for us. And that you, whoever is listening, that you're in pain, God feels your pain, grieves your pain, groans with you. And I pray that you would be curious about your pain as a place where God is present, bearing it with you, in you, and for you. This place matters. Your pain matters. God is here.
Thank you. Thank you, KJ, for being with us today. I think we're probably both going to cry.
Yeah, I'm crying.
No, you guys can't see us, but we're looking at each other through a video, and I almost just received what you said as a blessing for myself, and it's real. Our pain is real, and God is here. I mean, what better truth could we know than God is present? Blessings to you as you continue on in your journey with pain, and thank you for blessing us.
Thank you so much.
Before I share your I Can Do That for the week, be sure to rate and review this podcast and share it with a friend. It really does mean a lot to me, and it helps others find us. Thanks so much. Now here's your I Can Do That for this week. Here are a few questions for you to ponder or journal. What does grace mean to you, especially in the midst of your pain? KJ has said, I've come to see that living with suffering that lingers can mean more fully receiving God's presence that lasts. What does this mean to you? And finally, how has your connection, image, and relationship with Jesus changed in the midst of your own pain? Now you can rewind and go back and get those 3 questions. I really encourage you to pray or journal or talk with a friend or spiritual director. I know that many of us are in various forms of pain, and so it serves us well to look it in the eye and walk in grace. Remember, you're making your way forward one small, simple, and gracious step at a time.